Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Preparation is important. We'll learn all about it as we continue our psychology article. You are listening to Advanced Studio Classroom. My name is Brandon. It's August 24th. We continue our psychology article entitled Miracle on the Hudson Revisited. What an amazing story. We're looking back at this plane, not crash, but emergency landing in the Hudson River in New York City. It happened back in 2009 in January. It was an icy river, and so people had to deal with that as they were being rescued. Here with me to help discuss is Josh and Manya. Welcome back.
Thank you for having us back.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Brandon.
Manya, you are particularly interested in this topic. You said that on day one. What strikes you about this story?
I think it's just a really nice story. It was scary, of course, but rarely when you watch the news you hear such a pleasant ending to something that could have gone horrifically wrong. And the people who were involved, especially Captain Sully, who showed such good leadership in that moment, really made all the difference. Because it was a team effort, but I think as the leader, he made a really crucial decision to stay calm and act accordingly.
Right, Josh. And so, Josh, we've been talking about this for the past couple of days. What is something that you've learned from the captain here that you would like to, tell us about and kind of reiterate here?
Well, one of the things that I took away from this story is that here we have a captain, airline pilot, who's had decades of experience, a lot of training, run into a lot of different situations. But here with landing the plane in the Hudson River is something that he had never really done before and is not actually commonly trained for, meaning that during all the years of his training, there wasn't a lot of time spent on this type of water landing. But he was able to do it anyway, and he was able to make a very clear decision that given everything that was going on, of something that was not maybe very comfortable for him because it was a big unknown because he'd never done before, was probably going to be the best thing to do in the little time that he had in order to save a lot of lives. And he was able to do that, and it all turned out very well, miraculously well.
Yeah.
So what I've learned is that when we are preparing for things, to think about something that might be surprising or something that you may not be ready for, so that if it comes up, you'll feel like you have the confidence in order to deal with it.
Right. Now, Manya, Josh, have you ever been in a situation, I'm sure not like this, but in a situation where you just had to make a quick decision and it's because you knew something from the past, you were able to just kind of make the right decision? And I know I'm asking this kind of just, I didn't ask you ahead of time, so you don't have any story prepared, but is there something just off the top of your head where you've ever been in a situation like that?
So I've been in a couple of situations that have been near drowning situations where I've had to help somebody else. And in a couple of those situations, it was pretty much the worst possible scenario, meaning that there was somebody who was actively drowning, panicking, and I didn't have anything to hand to them in order to help them not drown, which is one of the worst situations you can be in if you're in the water trying to help somebody else, because usually what that means is that both people drown or one person does drown. So fortunately, I was very lucky in order to be able to do a couple things that I had learned in some training from lifeguarding that really helped make the situation so that nothing bad happened.
Wow, that's incredible. That is amazing, and thank God for that. How about you, Manya?
I can't think of one.
Okay.
But, I think from a day-to-day perspective, maybe when you're driving your car.
Yeah, sure.
And you see someone, maybe you had the right to turn, and then someone steps off the road and they're trying to cross.
Just that instant reflex, right?
Yeah, you have to know to stop. Otherwise, you might hit someone. Right. I think maybe little things like that, sometimes you will need to react
Right, because
really
you've
quickly.
done it 1,000 times, right? And you can so practice is important, right? The preparation ahead of time. And, we don't know what the future holds, but maybe something that we've learned will help us in a crisis. But this article, again, we're talking about kind of emotional intelligence and how to kind of harness those emotions and be aware of what's going on inside and being able to separate that. Sometimes we need to separate ourselves from our emotions in order to complete a task, for example. Well, we are on page 36. We invite you to follow along with us as we have our first reading for today.
To this day, Captain Sully Sullenberger insists that he's not a hero. Right, Sullenberger? Flight 1549 was different because it was thrust upon me and my crew. We did our best. We turned to our training. We made good decisions. We didn't give up, and we had a good outcome. I don't know that heroic describes that. It's more that we had a philosophy of life, and we applied it to the things we did that day and the things we did on a lot of days leading up to it. While you may never encounter circumstances quite like this, you will be faced with life-altering situations. Your ability to demonstrate emotional intelligence will impact the decisions you make in these moments. But what can you do to develop those abilities?
All right, so Captain Sullenberger says he's not a hero. Of course, a lot of people will say he is a hero, but a lot of times people say that. They're so humble.
Well, he won't call himself a hero, but we can
Right.
call him a hero.
That's right. And he definitely had an heroic act there, right, to land that plane in the water. What does he write in his book, Josh, in the next paragraph?
So here he says that Flight 1549 was different because it was thrust upon me and my crew. So different from being a hero, right? So that we did our best, turned to our training, made good decisions, and didn't give up. And because of that, we had a good outcome. So I think what he's trying to say here is that for them, it wasn't really a question of whether or not they were going to be a hero. It was a question of whether or not they really lived and trained and worked in such a way that they were always going to do the best that they could to keep people on the airplane safe. So it was just part of his job of being a pilot.
And it reminds me, Josh and Manya, that when you do your best at your job, right, you never know what the rewards are going to be. I mean, and so it pays off, right? Especially if you're a pilot, right? This is or a doctor or something like that. But it can pay off in other ways that aren't extreme like this. But, maybe you're thinking, I don't know why I have to do this way. Takes so much time or so much effort. But later on, you realize, hey, it was worth all the effort. And when Manya was sharing, I think it was yesterday, about school, right? And I was thinking about discipline. Discipline is super important, right? And we need to be disciplined in our work. And maybe if you're exercising, of course, you need that. And you see the fruit of it. But if you're not disciplined, it's probably not going to happen, right? And so I'm sure, of course, Captain Sullenberger was very disciplined or he would not have gotten to this point, right, in life. And so he says this, it was thrust upon me. Don't we feel that way sometimes, Manya, with these situations? They're just thrown upon us and we don't know always how to handle it.
Yeah, it sucks, frankly. I mean, it's like, okay, I didn't want this, but I have it. What do I do?
Right, and you learn from that situation. And sometimes you surprise yourself about what you can do, and you never know it until you try something new, right?
Yeah.
I remember before I came to work here at Studio Classroom, there were things maybe that, I had to kind of get better at and stuff like that. And so you never know until you try something new. We have opportunities to do many different things and maybe part of it you've never done before. So you try new things and that's how you learn. Well, he said we did our best. An important thing here that, of course, we always are reminded of, he didn't give up, right? He could have been like, forget it, I don't know what to do, right? And just who knows what would have happened in that case. And so he says, I don't know that heroic describes that. It's more that we had a philosophy of life. Wow, that's deep. A philosophy of life. What is he getting at, Josh?
So here, I believe what he's getting at is that their philosophy of life in working together, he and the crew, was to really provide a situation where everyone stays safe, right, as they're being transported back and forth, and that they would do everything in their power in order to make sure that they're ready for anything that might happen, including the unthinkable, which is both engines getting struck by birds at the same time when you are very close to the ground, right? So here, for him, I think what he's trying to say here is that they had a philosophy of always preparing themselves, always being ready, always being trained, so that when situations like this would happen, they would be able to make good decisions, which would save lives.
Right. Very good. And so he had this philosophy and then helped prepare him for the situation. So he applied it to things that we did on that day and things we did on a lot of days leading up to it. And so that prepared him for the situation. So, of course, Manya, we probably won't encounter this exact situation, right? But we can still learn from it.
Right. Like maybe when you need to figure out where the Lipas River is in the airplane.
Yeah.
Before you go down for a water landing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting that you bring that up because in kind of researching the background on this article, I've realized that I don't know how to brace. So before a plane crashes or does a really difficult landing, the captain or the flight attendant, they will usually say brace, right? Or brace yourselves, basically. And there is a particular position you have to go into when you do that. And I was thinking, I have no idea what that looks like, actually.
Yeah. Is this something with their hands up over your forehead?
You can do that, or you can put them under your legs, but you basically have to be bent down because when you crash, you're going to, how do I say it? You might bounce back. Yeah. So if you're already in that position where your head and your whole back is already in a downward position, that will lessen the impact. But it's like things like that. I just thought, man, I don't even know.
That brings up a question. How many of you actually pay attention when the flight attendants are telling you what to do? Maybe you're like, I've heard this 1,000 times, but maybe there's something different on that plane, or they, we don't always pay attention to that information.
There is one thing I always pay attention to, and that's where the emergency exits are.
Oh, me too.
Okay, good.
So, because they're different on every plane, right?
Yeah, and sometimes they're right behind you and you don't notice it.
And you want to know what the nearest one is, just in case. I think most people have a philosophy of life where they sort of walk through life or go through life. They figure, everything's going to be fine.
Or somebody will help me, or somebody else will take care of that.
Right. Because usually, I would say most people don't really experience emergencies kind of often.
Right.
Right? Maybe a once in a lifetime. But there are some people like Captain Sully where they have a sort of philosophy of life where even if the emergency never happens, you always want to be ready for it, no matter what.
Especially if you're in his situation where he's a captain, it's even more important.
Exactly, right.
But it's still good for everybody to kind of like know what to expect and not just to think, oh, someone else will help me do that, right?
Sure.
And so to take that responsibility and kind of be aware of your surroundings, right, and what's going on. When I'm on a plane, maybe I'm not always listening that closely to what the flight attendants are saying, but when they come around with the food cart, I'm ready to go. I'm paying attention to that.
You're ready to know what choice to make right away?
Yes. What food do you have? All right. Well, anyway, so while you may never encounter circumstances like this, you will be faced with some other life-altering situations, some situations in life that kind of change your life, right? And what are your emotions like in that situation? And how will they impact your decisions that you make in that moment? And how can you develop all of this? These are questions that we need to ask. Emotions can kind of take us down the wrong road if we're not careful, right, Manya?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about this, but if you let your emotions rule you, then you're going to wander aimlessly around places because, that's just what happens.
And here I thought it was interesting that they say life-altering situations, right? So obviously, when you're in an emergency, It could be life-changing because you're in danger, right? But I think there are a lot of other things that can be life-altering that aren't necessarily emergencies. So let's say you are not a person who does well with surprises, or you're not a person who does well sort of like we say, thinking on your feet, meaning that somebody asks you to do something, you have to make kind of a decision right away of whether or not you're going to do it. Maybe it might be a new position in a job. Maybe it might be an opportunity to go someplace where you've never been before. So if you're not used to really sort of thinking about how to deal with those kind of situations, and you have just an emotional response, I think a lot of people, their first emotional response would be no, right? Because they don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to do something new. And certainly there are plenty of people out there that really like that. But if you're the kind of person that knows that your emotional response might get in the way of opportunity, that would also be something you'd want to think about, maybe practice kind of what you want to or how you want to be when those things come up.
That's really great because in college, I decided to study public speaking for that exact reason. I thought, that is the most terrifying thing in the world. And like you were sharing yesterday, how, you start speaking too quickly, you get really nervous. I used to have all the same reactions, emotional reaction to public speaking as you. And then once I started studying it and getting a lot of opportunities to practice it, I noticed that it just became easier because I was constantly put in that position.
You built up your confidence.
Exactly. So,
So
like
I would say that would be a great example of how Manya is being sort of a high EQ, right? Like a good emotional intelligence, because she knew there was something that she reacted poorly to. And instead of trying to avoid it at all costs, she decided to work on it, study it, make it more comfortable for her so that she could really deal with those kind of situations where it came up, and it ended up working out really well for her. So I would say you have a very high EQ.
Oh, thank
That's
you.
exactly right. You saw a problem, and instead of running away from it, you embraced it, and you tried to see what the solution would be for that. And that is part of having a high EQ. And it also made me think that sometimes we need to do the opposite of what we feel. Right? Emotions can be all over the place. Sometimes, a simple example, sometimes I don't feel like maybe getting out of the house. I just want to stay home. But actually, the very thing I need to do is to get up and get out, and I'd feel much better or whatever. Like the situation in my mind may be one way, but the reality may be something very different. So we need to be aware of that. And as we learn more about ourselves, we can say, oh, yeah, I feel this way, but this is actually what I need to do, and it may be the opposite.
I have a good example with exercise.
Yeah.
So whenever I feel really tired and low energy, the best thing for me to do is go exercise.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to do when I'm really tired and low energy is exercise.
Exactly.
Right? So I have to know that I need to overcome that feeling, that emotion, if I really want to get to a good place.
Right.
Yeah. And generally speaking, when you make that decision to say, yes, I'm going to try this despite my hesitation towards it, then you can actually put yourself in a really safe situation to practice it versus being a situation being thrust upon you and you have to do something about it.
That's a really good point. Right.
Well, we're going to talk more next about preparation. We just asked the question, what can you do to develop these abilities with regards to emotional intelligence? It all begins with preparation. Let's find out as we go to our next reading.
It all begins with preparation. You must train your emotional abilities by recognizing the power of your emotions and learning how to direct them in a way that's beneficial. Emotions are instinctive, so you won't be able to control exactly how you feel. But you can control how you react to those feelings by taking control of your thoughts. That's what Captain Sullenberger did 10 years ago, on a day that would forever change his life and the lives of his crew and passengers. The miracle on the Hudson didn't happen by chance. It was the culmination of years of practice, a snapshot of a timeline that includes decades of preparation. In all those years, Sullenberger internalized countless useful habits until they became second nature.
All right, so you have to train your emotional abilities. That doesn't sound like fun, Manya. Something
No,
else
it
to
doesn't.
train. And how do you do that? By recognizing the power of your emotions and learning how to direct them in a way that is helpful. This is really important. This is what we've been talking about kind of the whole time. And so your emotions are powerful, but you need to learn how to direct them. And Josh gave us a great example. Manya's given us good examples how to redirect those emotions, right? Emotions are instinctive, Josh.
So instincts are reactions that you have without thinking about them. And emotions, kind of by definition, are instinctual. So you have emotions without thinking about them at all.
Can you control how you feel? It says here you won't be able to, Manya.
Well, I think in the moment it's hard to control your emotions, but if you give it some time and reflect a little bit, I'm sure then you can change your mind about how you feel.
But that goes back to your mindset and your thinking, which gets into the next sentence, which this is, I think, the best sentence in this whole article, or one of the best. It says, but you can control how you react to those feelings by taking control of your thoughts. And I think that's what Manya was getting to. You stop and reflect, and you change the way you think. Thinking really determines so much in your life. If you have a negative way of thinking, well, then how are you going to feel? So thinking really is important.
Yes, and what I do, this is really cheesy, but I'm going to share it with you guys.
What do you mean by
because
cheesy?
It's kind of like, you could laugh at me because it sounds silly.
Okay.
But we're friends, so I will share with you
Okay.
guys. When I have a thought or an emotion that I'm really unhappy with, a really negative emotion or thought, then I will say to myself, to the thought, I say, you are a lie, go away, you cannot stay. And it helps. It really does. Yeah.
Why does that help, or how does that help? Because it's simple, right?
Right, but that gives me the control to say to that thought or emotion, you cannot play, you cannot stay, go away.
Right. And you have to really believe that, right? It's not like a magical phrase that just by saying it, you have to really, like, inside
you have to mean
believe
it.
that.
Yeah.
Right?
I pretend I'm Dr. Seuss, and then I turn it into a rhyme. I'm like, go away.
All right.
But that's
good.
a great example of controlling your thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times we'll just think things in our head that we don't share with other people that is kind of really difficult to stop.
Yeah.
But what we can do is we can change how we react to those thoughts.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes we just let whatever thought wants to come into our mind, and that's dangerous, right? And we can have negative thoughts against other people, about ourselves, and a lot of that stuff can be lies, right? It can just be built on things that aren't even true, and so we're sitting there thinking about it, but it's just making us act negatively, and so we have to change the way we think, and that will help us along the way. It's a really important point. And so it says next, that's what Captain Sullenberger did 10 years ago on a day that would forever change his life and the lives of his crew and passengers. He didn't just focus on how he felt. He focused on his experience and how that could help him in the situation. And did this all happen by chance?
Well, that's a really good question. So I think here maybe what the article is not making such a clear connection to is that what he chose to do by landing the plane on the Hudson River in when it was really cold and really icy was a very unlikely solution, right? So what would have been the typical solution would have been to try and make it back to the airport. And I think here it doesn't really talk about how later when they did the investigations about what he did, that if given the amount of time that he had available, when they ran simulations, that means like a computer model that took everything into consideration, they found that more likely than not, the plane would have crashed and people would have died because there would have been no way for him to make it back to the airport. But there was no way for him to know that at the time. So he was really just doing what he thought was the best in the moment. And so that's kind of what's getting into this and sort of like reacting to your emotions. So if you for him, his instinct of landing the plane in the water, he also had to be confident enough to know that that was the right thing to do.
Right.
And to just do it.
And I believe they play this, that was a big part of the movie, the simulations, and they were putting everything in that should have been done based upon the rules. But I think that he reminded them, Anya, that, hey, you're forgetting the human element, right? I'm not a machine. And then they ended up adding more seconds because of that and realized that, hey, he was actually right. He made the right decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that was pretty fascinating.
So we have another term sometimes we talk about when people second guess the decisions that they make. And this can be really almost crippling. So if you're always like, you think you ought to do something, you're like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. And like, maybe I should, or maybe I shouldn't. Then you end up not doing anything at all.
Indecisiveness.
Right? Indecisiveness. And that can be, they can be very difficult, right?
Yes, that is a huge issue, and it causes you to not take action, and that's worse than you could have made 2 wrong decisions and corrected them maybe by the time you made no decision. So indecisiveness can be terrible.
So here, this is what this last little section of this paragraph is talking about. Culmination of years of experience. So something that leads up to or results in him making good decisions because they've been internalized on the inside and allows him to do the right thing just a second nature, just without even thinking about it.
All right, very good job there, Josh, summarizing that. We have one more reading before we go today. Let's go to it and we'll discuss.
You can do the same. With concentrated effort and practice, you'll be able to accomplish extraordinary emotional feats, transforming the strongest of your emotions from a destructive force to a power for good, just like a certain mild-mannered, unassuming pilot did 10 years ago. Captain Sully may not call himself a hero, but he definitely saved the day. And that sounds like a hero to me.
So we can all learn from Captain Sully. We can learn how to harness our emotions and use them for good. And they describe him here at the end as being mild-mannered and unassuming. Mild-mannered just meaning that you're gentle and you don't show extreme emotions. And then what does the word unassuming mean?
Unassuming means he doesn't think too much
Of himself.
Right. He doesn't desire to be noticed or to be given special treatment. He's just doing his job. He's not allowing his emotions to overtake him, and we can learn from that and use these principles in our own lives. So it begins with preparation, and it really has a lot to do with stopping, reflecting, thinking about what's going on the inside. And if we see a problem, trying into addressing that problem and not just letting things go as they are. Well, thanks for joining us for this month's psychology article. Join us again next time here on Advanced Studio Classroom. Until then, this is Brandon.
I'm Manya.
And I'm Josh.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.